The purpose of this short video is to give an overview of metabolism as it relates to nutrition. By metabolism, I mean all of the chemical reactions that occur in a living organism like you. Now, it would take a long time to talk about all of metabolism, so I thought we'd focus on one small part, and that is the conversion of macronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and turning them into ATP. First of all, there will be four major steps that may be used to convert a macronutrient into energy. They are glycolysis, the intermediate step, the TCA cycle, and the electron transport chain. Now, some nutrients only need 2 steps to get turned into ATP, and some take all 4 steps. Take a minute to write down the 4 steps. Hit pause if you need to, and next I'll give you a brief summary for what each one does. Even if the description doesn't make a whole lot of sense yet, hopefully it will by the end of this video. So here we go. Step 1 is going to be glycolysis. And glycolysis is the process of breaking down glucose and turning it into something called pyruvate. Step 2 is the intermediate step. This step is going to take that pyruvate and turn it into something else called acetyl-CoA. Some people call it acetyl-CoA. Step 3 will be the TCA cycle. It stands for the tricarboxylic acid cycle, and it's a series of steps that take small molecules like the acetyl-CoA from step 2 and tears the hydrogens off of them. You'll see why. Step 4, and the last step, is the electron transport chain, and this is basically a way to gather up all of the hydrogen from step 1, 2, and 3 and use them to make a whole lot of ATP. Alright, next I'd like you to draw the following diagram. As you're drawing this, is anything looking familiar to you? Previously, we said that glycolysis meant taking glucose and breaking it down to pyruvate. Right, so let's label this first part glycolysis. Next, we said that the intermediate step was going to take the pyruvate and turn it into acetyl-CoA, or acetyl-CoA. So let's label the next part intermediate step. Next, we said that there was the TCA cycle, which took the acetyl-CoA, or acetyl-CoA, and other small molecules, and throughout this cycle, it's going to pluck hydrogens off of those small molecules. So let's label that TCA cycle. Finally, let's label the last part the electron transport chain, because this is where all of those hydrogens are going to get used to make ATP. So far, pretty simple, right? Let's look at the next level of detail, and let's say we're going to turn, say, glucose into ATP. I picked glucose because it is going to use all 4 of the steps we just wrote down, whereas some other nutrients only use a couple. Step 1. Glycolysis. When you eat glucose and your body needs to break it down to turn it into energy, the first thing that's going to happen is the glucose is going to get split in half. The 6-carbon glucose, here at the top, gets broken down into 2 3-carbon pieces. These 3-carbon pieces are now called pyruvate. Here's one pyruvate, and there's the second pyruvate. The whole overall process, again, is called glycolysis. Now, a couple things happen in glycolysis. First of all, you'll see that a little bit of ATP is made directly. You'll get some ATP just from turning that glucose into pyruvate. Another thing you'll notice is a couple of hydrogens get plucked off of the little broken down glucose molecule. Now, we haven't labeled all of the things attached to these carbons, but you probably recall that every carbon has 4 bonds on it, and some of the things on those bonds are hydrogens. So a couple of those get removed, and we're going to see later that those hydrogens can eventually get turned into ATP. So that's step 1. Step 2 is the intermediate step. So we've taken our glucose and we've broken it down to pyruvate. We already did that in step 1. In step 2, the intermediate step, we're going to break them down even further into 2 carbon fragments called acetyl-CoA. Now where did the other carbon go? We started with 3 carbons, we ended with 2 carbons. Where did that 3rd carbon go? Well, it actually was lost as carbon dioxide, which you breathe out. So when you're breaking down glucose for energy, part of the carbon dioxide you're breathing out is from the breakdown of that glucose. Now, no ATP is made directly in this step, but you do notice that a couple more hydrogens get removed. Here they are, 1 and 2. Keep in mind that later those hydrogens can be used to make ATP. Okay, last question you're probably wondering is, what is this coenzyme A? This 2-carbon group makes it acetyl, and this coenzyme A makes it acetyl-CoA. For now, just think of this CoA as a little group that helps to carry those carbons on to the TCA cycle, which is our next step. So step 3 out of 4 is the TCA cycle. Now that the acetyl-CoA enters into this TCA cycle, a series of steps will begin to occur. Now, I don't care that you've memorized. Most instructors, in fact, don't care that you memorize the intricate details of these steps at this level of nutrition. What I do want you to notice is that lots of the hydrogen gets plucked off in this step. Here's a hydrogen being plucked off. Here's one, here's another, here's another. So a series of hydrogens are plucked off, and each of those can be used in the final step to make lots of ATP for us. Next, I want you to notice that a small amount of energy, or ATP, is also made here. So some ATP is made directly. Alright, last step. Step 4 is the electron transport chain, and this last step is basically a place where all of those hydrogens from step 1, step 2, and step 3 are all carried into this region of the mitochondria, and here those hydrogens can allow us to make lots of ATP. Now the details of this process are somewhat complicated, but the overview is pretty simple. We create a gradient of hydrogens, lots and lots and lots of hydrogens here. They all want to come in from where it's really crowded to where it's less crowded, and the allowing of those hydrogens to come into where it's less crowded allows us to make more ATP from the ADP that was already floating around. So the overview is you use lots of hydrogens from all of those steps to make boatloads of ATP. And that's basically it. So hopefully this overview helped you.